find adventure at the click of a button, or from the turn of a page, or the casting of a die. Join your hosts, Coniff and Shiloh, on an unforgettable journey. Questing the Multiverse. The time is now. We are finally launching Questing the Multiverse. Shiloh, how do you feel at this exact moment in time?
This exact moment?
A little bloated, maybe?
No. Why are you assuming that I ate something that I shouldn't have? No, I feel both relieved and really excited that this project's going to take off. So, yeah.
It took a few months of actually bouncing ideas back and forth before we landed where we did, which for you listeners is what you're listening to now, which is this grand idea that we kind of came up with when we decided, you know what, we don't really want to do a singular story, a singular game, whatever else. You know, we just want to talk about everything that we enjoy doing, and we don't want to lock ourselves into something specific like we ended up doing with GG Party Chat. So if you know us from GG Party Chat, which was the previous podcast that Shiloh, myself, and our dear friend Swampy did for 3 years, I think it was. We did like
3.
Yeah, we did a single game an episode originally, and it would swap every 2 weeks. And that became pretty tiring. It turns out, like, I mean, I could do that, you know, but you get burnt out because you're like, well, here, I barely got 25% of the way through Red Dead Redemption 2, and now gotta switch gears.
Yep. Yeah, it was a lot of throwing. It was basically me playing darts. Is what
with Game Pass.
What it looked like there for no, just our concept.
For now
until we came to this solution was basically just me throwing darts at a dartboard and never ever getting anywhere close to the actual bullseye. So it's good to have finally hit the bullseye after I don't know, a good dozen and a half darts thrown at the dartboard. So.
Well, why don't you... So, I mean, obviously, we're going to have friends that have listened to GG Party Chat, or maybe even No Cube Zone, or maybe even before that, one of the podcasts I did way back in the day. But for the new listeners out there, why don't you tell them about yourself, what you enjoy, speed dating question style, I don't know, whatever you want. Who are you, Shiloh?
Hi, well, I'm Shiloh. I'm a... age-challenged gentleman.
What was it? It was grave, coffin. What was that?
Coffin dragger.
Yeah,
coffin,
the old British slang, I guess. If that's really offensive, I apologize. We did look at a long list of offensive British terms and they were like ranked from mildly offensive to extremely offensive. And this is completely unrelated to what we were talking about at the time when I looked this up, but coffin dragger, coffin something was in there, and it was it provided a laugh for us.
I have a whole new arsenal of fun British slang words to use, but I'm older. I'll be 50 in January of next year, so definitely on the older cusp of gamer generations. So you get to be able to hear basically the opinions of a boomer, I suppose.
You're not a boomer though, are you? Aren't you like
no
Gen X?
No, I'm Gen X, but I'm a chef. Well, sous chef right now. I've been chefs in the past.
You're a chef in my heart, for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And also run an Etsy shop making gaming tables with my father. So that we'll link it into show notes later. But
it's in the show notes.
That's been a kind of a new development over the past couple of years. I've always been an avid role player. Well, not really a role player, but a gamer of old RPG background. So coming up with this idea to make gaming tables for the general public, and we've been shipping them out across the U.S. So that's been fun because it's been kind of, I've been learning woodworking and then kind of throwing that into what I enjoy as well. So um, really love music and obviously video games. So that's pretty much the synopsis. So
Didn't you play bass in a punk band once, or did you sing?
no, I sang. I'm not musically inclined at all.
You don't have
like
to be for punk, right? That's a low blow.
Well, it was,
I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
no, it wasn't really punk. It was no. A friend of ours at the time came up with the best descriptions. Like, man, you guys sound like the Stones on Quaalude. So I was like, okay, I guess we're gonna run with that.
That's a compliment, right? It could be.
I don't know. Yeah, we were kind of I would call us more of a post-punk alternative thing back in the early '90s. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah. What about you? I'm sure everyone knows.
That's Shiloh Waltz.
Yeah, that's me.
I am not 50, and I'm not close, thankfully. I guess for my own well-being. But I have been playing video games my entire life. Not being 50, being much younger than that. I grew up with video games as a pretty large source of entertainment. I mean, I'm like a 90s kid, so I'm not like, 18 and I have known nothing but MySpace and whatever else. But it's like video games in the 90s, early 2000s, and then obviously all the way to now have been, I would say, probably the largest entertainment medium over even movies and stuff. And I'd certainly say that's the case now, but maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I've been playing video games a long time. I've been doing podcasting centric stuff for quite a while. YouTube, I just kind of kicked that off on a whim this year. Really, I just put out a single video that seemed to hit the algorithm and then go viral, and that's I did a ESO versus Guild Wars 2 video for my friends, and then like 200,000 people have viewed it, and so that was a complete accident. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, just know that, like I said, I've said in comments, I've said in other videos, I put out videos there when I feel like it. So, I mean, you subscribe at your own risk if you do so. Other than that, though, I've been a musician pretty much my whole life. Saxophone, guitar, I could play bass, I could play piano, I could play drums, I could sing. Saxophone and guitar were my main instruments. Singing has kind of come and gone here and there. So just all around enjoy music, but really enjoy video games as a hobby, and then just talking about them because they are a form of art, and there's a lot to discuss. Certainly in some of the games we covered back when GG Party Chat was going on, like Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. What was that? Turing Test game, I think. Hollow Knight, Life is Strange, What Remains of Edith Finch. If any of you listeners have played any of those games, certainly in the case of What Remains of Edith Finch, there's a lot to talk about and a lot to try to wrap your mind around. So that's what I love, truthfully, is just discussing and going into games with like-minded individuals, I suppose. So, Shiloh, what is Questing the Multiverse? If you could give it your elevator pitch, you threw the dart, it landed on this. What is this? I remember we sat in Discord for quite a while one night, literally throwing words at each other. Like, does this sound like it would be a good name? Does this sound like... And then eventually we landed on Questing the Multiverse. So, What is it to you?
I think it really sums up the best way to describe exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to cover games, and we're going to have it in either in a single or multi-episode content format for an alternating cast of games. So
Yep.
we'll announce the first game here shortly, and we'll probably run that for 5 episodes and then move on to another game. And then, as an example, maybe we'll do an episode for X game and then go back to another game for another 4 episodes. And so you're going to have this ongoing cycle of continuing content for games that we're particularly focused on. And, in the past for GG Party Chat, a game like, I think we led off the whole series with the Elder Scrolls Online.
Mm-hmm.
That could have been, episodes and episodes and episodes of that game in particular, especially with the amount of hours that we had into it, could warrant that coverage. But we just did it for 1 episode. So we're going to kind of really hone down and focus in on some of these bigger games. We're going to have some big games coming out this year. You'll know that. If you don't already. I don't know what rock you've been living under, but we've got some big games coming out this year, and we have some big games coming out early next year. So we have some good content coming your way, listeners. So we're going to review episodes on video game adaptation of TV shows, books, movies, board games.
Yeah,
so you're going to have a full gambit of coverage for varying things.
So that I wanted to touch on too, because as of lately, there's been some incredible adaptations of video game related stuff. Now, I wasn't around, but I'm sure you recall the OG Mario live action movie that was done in the 80s or whenever that was.
Regretfully.
And that's just one bad example from way back when. But like the Halo TV show that was only like a few years ago. It did not contain the spirit of Halo. It contained the look and the likeness and the sounds even, but like the story of Halo just was lost. A lot of people have problems with the Witcher TV show currently. I read the books. The TV show is just nothing like the books. So it is what it is. But on the flip side of that, you've got stuff like Arcane, which is a TV show put on by Riot Games about characters from League of Legends. I've never played League of Legends. I've watched Arcane through like 3 times because it's that good. And then you've got like Cyberpunk Edge Runners. That was an anime that came out last year, I think it was. A fantastic anime. I mean, they took places from the show, or rather from the game, and put them in the show to the point where I could watch parts of the show and be like, I have walked in that exact spot in the game. And so just a great adaptation. And then you've got stuff like Last of Us show, which I still need to watch.
Yeah.
And it's going to be something like where you're going to see these adaptations grow as video games become this, massive, ziggurat of entertainment, just climbing into the sky, money everywhere is to be made in this medium. You're going to see these adaptations come to town, and they're going to be good, hopefully.
They're not going to be B grade anymore. They're going to be A grade. So
they're going to be decent. And so I did want to touch on that, but yeah, like you said, for the first part, it's really just us dictating what we talk about rather than the show dictating what we play. So we might spend a bunch of time in a game and we're going to talk about it. It's going to be our adventures with our friends, various things relating to that. I mean, we got like research into the game, because learning about how these games that we spent so much time playing were made is really exciting to me. Watching those documentaries is fantastic, and there's a lot of thought that goes into them. And so researching that, maybe going over the lore of the worlds that we're playing in, because of course, like, we're questing the multiverse, we're going on quests, we're going on adventures in a multitude of IPs, you know, Star Wars, The Witcher, D&D, to give a bit of foreshadowing. But then eventually we would like to take this to the streaming world. We do want to live stream these episodes at some point. We just need to get our feet under us first, so that way we can kind of get a routine, figure out like, okay, what works, what doesn't, so on and so forth. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you will kind of see a sneak peek of that, because we're testing out, at least in these early episodes, this episode certainly, how we would like to lay out our live stream, you know, with our two lovely mugs and episode graphic and everything. But Shiloh had the idea for like contests. I don't know what that means. He's probably going to give away something. Maybe he'll give away a game table. Probably not, because those are a lot of work. But just, you know, contests of some kind, interviews, guest co-hosts. If you listen to GG Party Chat, certainly last year, we love having our friends on, and you know, other streamers as well, just to talk games. Because at the end of the day, if you play video games and you stream it, or you work, maybe you develop video games or something, you didn't do that because you wanted to make money. Maybe some people, but 90% of people did that because they just love playing games. And so that's what, when we bring people on, that's what we're going to try to share in, is that love of the game playing. So, but also we're going to have a bunch of different segments, you know, off and on, as we, as he mentioned, you know, as we play different games, we're going to have different game segments. But there is one segment, Shiloh, that we did brainstorm before this whole idea came to completion, I guess. And it's a little segment called the face-off segment. So, Shiloh, do you want to just run through this real quickly, and then I'll tease the first matchup? We're not going to do it in this episode, but and I'll fill in the gaps too, but you go ahead. You can take the floor.
Yeah, well, the idea is we're going to run a 64 seed bracket similar to March Madness,
which I hate.
Which he hates.
Unless it's about video games.
Yeah, well, we were both born in Indiana, correct? No, you were born in California.
Yeah, but we lived there.
I was born in Indiana, so I should love college basketball. I don't really have a horse in the race going to culinary school, so
spoiler alert, he doesn't really
Mighty
care.
Griffins were not exactly a powerhouse going to compete with North Carolina or Duke. So we're going to have a 64 seed bracket system. Coniff has, assembled this list, and we're going to kick off the first seed next week. And it'll be interesting to see how all this pans out. But the games are going to be, the games are going to have a game, and we're gonna rate them and see who wins. And what are we gonna do about the tie? Did we decide that?
So with the way this,
there could be a lot of splits. I'm predicting this. So
we came up with, or I came up with, once upon a time, this video game rating system. It's real fancy. It's sitting in Excel. So not real fancy.
It's real fancy.
But it's there's different categories, and then inside those categories are like subcategories. And in the event that a game is split, you know, where I'm just like one way and Shiloh's the other, we're going to rate both of them together using this system and see which one has the higher score. And if those two happen, you know, if after that it happens to have the exact same score, which would be pretty hard to, you know, I guess, line up. I don't know what we'll do, so we'll figure that out down the road. But it won't happen for this first matchup, that's for sure. But like this rating system is, you know, you've got like gameplay is one big category, the design is another, the fun factors another category, and then we did a fourth category for time spent playing. and we're still like maybe 85% happy with how this does it. And if you're in our Discord, I will link it inside Discord. Not only the video game bracket graphic, the video game face-off graphic, which is what the segment's called, but I will link somewhere the Excel file so you can open it in your own computer and maybe use it for your own thing or just see. However, this first matchup, like I said, is I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it is Hell Let Loose versus Destiny 2. And each of these matchups or matchups is, it could be pretty off the wall, honestly, like Mario versus Gears 5 or something. You know, I don't know. I don't think either of those two specifically are on here. But that's what I mean is like, it's going to be pretty, some of these are going to be pretty off the wall. And you're like, how the heck are you going to compare these two? Well, you'll have to listen and see. But there are like 4 generic categories that I tried to place games in. So they're in different, what do they call those in the actual March Madness? Where you've got like the 16 here, the 16 here, 16, 16.
Oh, there's, I don't know.
We're not
like I said, I'm not a huge.
We're not basketball nerds. Regions, I don't know. So anyway, one of those is mass multiplayer. Another is multiplayer RPG, and that's going to be like RPGs with multiplayer elements, or you know, might have them. Then single player RPG, where it's only single player. And then miscellaneous, because there's a lot of other stuff. So we'll go through that. You did say next week. That leads me to another thing that I did want to mention back about what this podcast is. We are doing weekly episodes. So every Monday, bright and early for your morning commute or your morning get out of bed and walk to your home office, because that's the world we live in. It'll be ready for you, which is a departure for us because we used to do bi-weekly, and that made sense because we were trying to switch games every episode. I couldn't imagine, unless I legit had no job and only did this podcast, us talking about a new game every single week. Like, I just would have no time. So, so anyway, we are doing weekly episodes. So next week will be the inaugural face-off segment. And as I mentioned, it'll be Hell Let Loose versus Destiny 2. So that should be a good discussion because I have a ton of experience with both. Shiloh has only experience with Destiny 2, and we're going to get into that a bit too. So, Shiloh, this is what you've been waiting for, is the discussion of our first game major segment of Questing the Multiverse. What is it?
Yeah, it's been what, 23 years?
Has it been that long?
Since the first game? Yeah. So our first game that we are covering on Questing the Multiverse will be Baldur's Gate 3. And I think Coniff has definitely fallen suit.
Yep.
Couldn't be more happy to announce that.
It was not on my radar at all.
Yeah, it wasn't, because I had mentioned it and you were like, oh, yeah.
Well, I didn't know what it was. I had no concept. And then we started playing Divinity Original Sin 2. And we played that, and we can get into that a little bit. But then Honor Among Thieves was out in theaters around the same time. And so it was just this whirlwind of D&D that just whipped me in the face and said, hey, by the way, the greatest D&D game to ever exist is coming out like in a few months' time. So, yeah. But Divinity 2, do you want to talk a bit about that? Because they're by the same developers. So,
yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing, I know, at least for you, that brought this game in Baldur's Gate 3 to the forefront, was playing through Divinity Original Sin 2. So it wasn't my first rodeo, but I think it probably was yours. Or
Yes.
but well, you had played some CRPGs in the past, but
Yeah.
that video games, at least CRPGs of the past, really don't hold a candle to Divinity Original
No.
Sin 2. Honestly, a lot of current CRPGs don't really hold a candle to Divinity Original Sin 2. But that was a big one that kind of brought this game into the forefront of what we were going to cover day one. And in fact, it pushed us up a month because they pushed Baldur's Gate 3 up a month. And we had to kind of scramble a little bit to go, oh, no, we need to get this podcast out ASAP because we didn't want to fall behind in the coverage before, after the release and be like, oh, well, yeah, this game came out and then, well, here we are. So we wanted to have a few episodes before the launch to have everyone kind of join the hype that we're pretty hyped about this game. So,
well, it was like Divinity was an eye opener because having played what would you call like Witcher 3, like just regular like adventure RPGs?
Adventure RPG.
So like having played that, ESO, Guild Wars 2, which we had played a ton of late 2022 into really now, with like a few distractions here and there. Like those games are very different from what Divinity Original Sin 2 lets you do. The freedom of going wherever, at whenever you might get packed up, as one of our good friends from ESO, Genghis, used to say all the time about PvP, because you'd walk into an area with extremely high level NPCs or mobs or enemies or whatever. Like for instance, on the Reaper's Coast, you walk into that field and there's the scarecrows and they're at least, 4 to 5 levels higher than you, and it's a bad day. Anyway, like when I played this, and of course I'm talking with Shiloh and some of our other friends, like Cash and then our friend Jeff, and we're like, or I'm like, I've never experienced this freedom. One, to play and do combat how I want. And the turn-based thing, let me just say, like, I was very hesitant going into Divinity Original Sin 2 that I wouldn't like the turn-based combat. Again, I'd only experienced the action, live combat of The Witcher, of all these other games that we've played. And so when and I think that if I would have found Baldur's Gate 3 or found out about it before I played Divinity 2, I might not have been as receptive to it, because it's pretty apparent that BG3 is turn-based combat and all sorts of stuff. And we'll get into plenty with the game in a little bit. But so that was, that for me, Divinity 2 was like a primer for Baldur's Gate 3, which I still haven't played, even though it's been in early access. I've wanted to save it for the day when it launches and I go full force into it.
Yeah, it kind of surprised me that you were hesitant about turn-based combat, considering your background in board games. I mean, board games are obviously turn-based. You don't have live-action board games.
There are a few, actually, where you do stuff, where you do your actions at the same time. But you're right. It's like Magic the Gathering, turn-based. Board games, turn-based. And by the way, we're going to get into some of that stuff in this show, too, because, again, we're talking all things geek. And I play a lot of board games and Magic. Shiloh's, you can see if you're watching this on YouTube, he's got Betrayal at Baldur's Gate behind him on the shelf, which is a great board game based on the Betrayal at House on the Hill original game. So anyway, I was, despite that though, like video game wise, like I hadn't played a turn-based game in an extremely long time. So I was very trepidatious towards it.
But I mean, excuse me, I appreciate the tactical sense of those games. I mean, that's what I grew up playing, were these old CRPGs, like the Eye of the Beholder, Pool of Radiance, Secret of the Silver Blades, all these old SSI gold box games are what I grew up on. That's all, I really played as a kind of an early teenager on probably a Commodore 64 or 128 or something like that, that we had at the house when I was growing up. But yeah, so it's what I was used to. And of course, the graphics are way notched up, and, the stories are a lot better, and everything, like we talked about before, video games have gone from C to B to A grade along, and now all of the adaptation stuff is having to catch up as well, which hopefully it finally has. So, but yeah, speaking of adaptations, and I wanted to get to the next point, which were probably another big factor in why you kind of turned the corner, was watching Honor Among Thieves. So, as someone that has grown up with D&D almost his entire life, this was kind of a new eye opener for you, correct? In watching that movie,
it was. I mean, I grew up in a place where D&D was a big no-no, and there was a lot of misconceptions about it, misunderstandings, and I had wanted to watch Honor Among Thieves a little bit because it was a fantasy show. But once I played Divinity, found out that the same developers that did DOS 2 were doing Baldur's Gate 3, and it was a D&D, and we had a few conversations where it was like basically a come to Jesus moment with like that D&D's actually very deep. There's a ton of lore. There's a ton of like little things in it that, have been worked on and pioneered or built upon for the past 30 years or however long it's been, longer than 30 years.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When I found all that out, and then the reviews started coming in that Honor Among Thieves was a pretty fun take on D&D in a live action. And one of my favorite movies that's really underground and under the radar is a movie called Gamers Dorkness Rising, which is like, you talking A, B, C tier. It's at least like a G or lower tier quality film about a group of friends that play a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. They don't ever use the term Dungeons and Dragons because copyright, but if you've never seen it, it's actually on YouTube in all of its 480 or 720p glory, the entirety of it, and it's Gamers Dorkness Rising, and it is fantastic. It's hilarious, and so I'd watched that plenty of times, and I knew plenty about like what, like, I guess the memes about D&D or the jokes or whatever. So going into Honor Among Thieves, all I was expecting is that I'd be entertained, and I 100% was, because I've watched it 2 or 3 times now, because now it's on Paramount Plus, and I really enjoy it. It's, that was, again, if Divinity was the primer, Honor Among Thieves was like the next coat, and now I am all in, prepped for Baldur's Gate 3. Although I've got plenty to learn, and that's why Shiloh is here to school me. So
I don't know about that. I mean, hopefully our listeners will be able to school me, because I am definitely not an expert, and there are plenty of people out there that know a lot more than I do. But I will at least give you my history, and kind of, you can determine whether I'm a charlatan or not by that. But my first introduction to D&D, the quick little story, was when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, we would go back to Terre Haute, Indiana, where my grandparents lived, where I was born. Shout out to our buddy Jibs. That's where he resides. Poor soul. But it's and my grandmother, for some reason, I don't really know why. I don't think anyone, maybe my mom or dad, can, if they're listening to this, can say, no, we definitely told her to get that for you. But for some reason, she bought me the red box, probably around 1983. So the original 1983 edition of the D&D red box, which if you don't know, listener, if you're not Abe Lincoln age like myself and don't know what the 83, if you ever seen like the red box cover or like on a t-shirt with the classic Larry Elmore art illustration of a red dragon, and there's looks like a barbarian warrior in the front, and he's got a sword and he's kind of getting ready to look like he's hacking at it. That was the original red box. So it was a all-encompassing little box that had a couple of really thin rule books. One was like the player handbook, and one was the DM guide. And I think it was based off second edition or third. I don't even remember what edition of D&D it was, but it definitely wasn't first. I know that because that was probably in the 70s. But yeah, so around 9 or 10, I got for Christmas a D&D red box just out of the blue. This was kind of right before, I think, a lot of the D&D demon scare of the late 80s with the PMRC and Tipper Gore and all that, which was a real deal. There are movies, I think Tom Hanks was in one called like Monsters and Mazes or something like that. It was a made-for-TV movie that was basically propaganda against D&D. But anyway, that's what I grew up, and I tried to make my, have my brothers play with me or whatever in the back of the station wagon on the way back to Tennessee, with mixed results. But it got me into D&D, and eventually in high school, I found some like-minded friends, and we would kind of gather around. Most of the time, we weren't playing D&D; we'd play other role-playing games, like on a Friday night or something after school. But yeah, so, and like I said earlier, a lot of my background with D&D is actually from the SSI Gold Box game. So the Eye of the Beholder, Pool of Radiance, and all of those games, which eventually led to Baldur's Gate 1 in 1998. So I was much older in 98, but and Baldur's Gate 2 in 2000. So it has been 23 years since, I think there are a couple of expansions for Baldur's Gate 2, but yeah, it's been a while since we've had a Baldur's Gate game. And yeah.
Well,
and now I make tables as a side job, so there's that.
for board games, anything. Get your wood on. How's wood designs?
Yeah, there's the commercial.
That's my little joke commercial. But yeah, so when you said, well, I guess when we were already interested and we were already planning on doing this podcast, but then the first time in history for video games, certainly recently, a game's release date gets moved up a month instead of back indefinitely, which happens all the time. Both of us were very shocked and were like, okay, I guess we need to launch this in like a month and a half, and so here we are. But that was again, like, Baldur's Gate 3 has been in early access for a few years, right? So it's not like just brand, new.
3 years. 3 years in early access, 6 years in development. So
but I mean, you've only been able to play the first act, and so the game is releasing on August 3rd. So whatever, a week and a half after this episode will go live. So if you're listening to this way in the future, hope you've been enjoying the game, because it's been out. Let
us know how it is.
Yeah, but we did want to do we wanted to kind of treat this as multiplayer D&D, because a lot of the friends that we play with are not in our state, or not in within any reasonable distance where we can meet up like once a month, even once like every 2 months. So wanted to play, maybe want to play D&D, or at least that type of game. And here comes Baldur's Gate 3, which is turn-based, has die rolls for various actions, a full-blown character creation with anything you could ever hope and dream of in the D&D world. A ton of classes and subclasses. I think it was like 48 or something. There's a ton of I think you have some data here that we'll get over. Why don't you just go over it now, because there's, like I said earlier in the episode, this is the greatest D&D game of all time, and it's not even out yet. So I'm going on a limb to say that now.
I don't think it's a huge limb. Well, it is a huge limb, not a little bitty branch. I mean, from that, it's been 6 years in development. It's been 3 years of early access. I think a lot of people were maybe a little bit hesitant, and then finally they were like, all right, this is when it's getting released, and then they moved it up even further. So very exciting. A lot of this is just mind blowing. So 174 hours of cinematics, which is insane. I mean, obviously, if you're playing through the game, you're not going to see 174 hours of cinematics. It's a role-playing game, so based on the choices that you make, you and your party make, or you alone, you're not going to see 174 hours. But if you wanted to, from what I can gather, and I'm sure I will be doing this, be playing through this game maybe at least twice. Who knows, maybe more, depending on how much you love it. But so you might, eventually see 174 hours of cinematics. A 2 million word script. I saw or read that it is basically more words than all of Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
Is that correct? Something like that.
I don't remember. No,
it was
something like that.
Compared to Game of Thrones, like over
the cinematics were compared to Game of Thrones. Like there's more cinematic hours than there is Game of Thrones. But 2 million word scripts, as someone that does voiceover, like that's hard to fathom.
It's insane.
A 23-minute video on YouTube that's mostly talking is like, I did the math for Tempest. It's like 2,900 words or something. Mm-hmm. Obviously there's cinematics in there and whatever else, but like that's literally 2,900. We're talking 2 million words, which of course that's many different characters. That probably includes just random NPC chatter that you hear, like that. You remember in Divinity 2 and what was that, Driftwood, that chick that would just go around the town square and it would be the same lines over and over and over. Anyone who's played Divinity Original Sin 2 knows what I'm talking about. And she's so annoying.
To the point where we're like, oh god.
Yeah. So it's
trying to manage my inventory.
It probably includes little stuff like that too, which is fine. Yeah. But 2 million is massive.
Yeah, and that's with 13 subtitled languages, which is insane. So obviously, I'm guessing the main game is voiced over in English.
Yeah.
But 13 different subtitled languages is, along with the 2 million word script, is insane. Over 600 spells and actions for your characters to mull over.
I think Divinity Original Sin 2 had like 230 or 50 or something, which is a lot, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
But 600.
600.
That's a lot more.
Yeah. I'm not a mathematician, but that's a lot more.
That's a significant increase.
Mm-hmm. And they're speculating an average playthrough to be between 75 to 100 hours as a typical playtime. Put that in air quotes if you'd like, with a kind of I don't know if you would call it a persistent, a very typical RPGer that likes a lot of detail, probably close to about 200 hours
Or that
of
wants
playtime.
to do a bunch of side quests, explore.
More in-depth playthrough would be about 200 hours.
To put into perspective for that, and we'll talk about this next episode maybe because we're doing the face-off. I have like 230 hours in Hell Let Loose, and I've been playing that game pretty much every Sunday since like mid-September of 2022. So that's insane. 200 hours for an RPG is unbelievable. I do know it took me 100 hours to just get through the Witcher 3 base game, and then another, I think, 50 hours total for both expansions. So 150 hours for that game is pretty great. But that included expansions. So I will probably... And Divinity 2 Original Sin took me 96 hours, I think, to beat. And I didn't do everything. I did a lot, but there were points in different chapters where I was just like, yeah, I'm ready to move on. So
yeah, it's going to be a big game, and a lot of people. I've read some stuff about people like, is it going to be too big? No, just be quiet.
Get your money's worth at least.
Yeah,
So.
just be quiet. Quit nitpicking. But I don't think so. Not for a typical RPG fan. It's not going to be too long.
No.
Maybe for an average gamer, I still don't think it will be. I don't think an average gamer will make it to 200 hours, but I think 75 to 100 hours would be, that's kind of that's a good game for kind of an entry level player.
Just a bit.
Yeah. So, the game will be available August 3rd, like we said, on PC, and then September 6th on PS5, which will be, if you've pre-ordered Baldur's Gate 3 in the early access, you were granted Digital Deluxe, which gave you 3 days of early access, which they've done away with because they moved the game up an entire month. So, there shouldn't be any splitting hairs about that. But the people for PS5 that have done that or have gotten early access or ordered their digital collector's edition, I think is what, or the big boy 300 or 250 or whatever it was for the physical collector's edition, have 3 days of early access. So either September 3rd or September 6th on PS5, with Xbox X and S coming soon, which have hinted at maybe by the end of the year. My guess would be maybe early next year, because who knows? But evidently, been some hang up with Xbox, but it is coming out. It just needs some more time to iron out all the details. So,
all right. Well, we're gonna kick off because we're not done. We're going to kick off our dive into, I guess, the introduction of BG3. And we had our good friend Katie lend her voice for this little intro or BG bumper.
Well, if it isn't our two illustrious adventurers, friends, you should read what they're really saying about you in the latest Baldur's Mouth.
What sort of wild tales are they spinning this time?
Grab a seat and I'll bring you some ale. Why don't you tell me what really happened?
So I'll kick it off real quick because I do want to preface, I don't know a ton about Dungeons and Dragons. Like I said, I didn't play it ever growing up. I have friends nowadays that do play it, or have played it, or at least are interested in it, the lore of it, everything. And so I'm approaching this as a new fan. And like I said earlier, Shiloh is going to school me. He's the wise counsel of the Faerun. I'm just now making up words. But the reality is, Shiloh, we had a conversation not that long ago in which I kept you up extremely late because I was poring over a map that I had found in a Wolfheart FPS video about, he did this little lore playlist series on what you basically need to know before you start Baldur's Gate 3. And I've watched that specific one, the one about the world, multiple times because it's truly fascinating to me that it is this deep. And when you really get into it, it's really no surprise because it's been around since the 70s or early 80s. And it's a fantasy world every bit as fleshed out and deep as Lord of the Rings. So why don't you take it away and I will interject here and there because that's what I do.
Hopefully that's what you do. So the Forgotten Realms, I'm going to try to the picture here, like our own world, is a kind of a layer upon layer of history. So, for example, you have a modern city built in the 2000s or even this century. And then underneath that is an Aztec temple or something. And then underneath that, maybe some cave dwelling. That is kind of the idea of a lot of the Forgotten Realms. So Waterdeep is a perfect example. You have a human city that's built on top of an ancient dwarven city, which was built on top of an even older and more ancient elven city.
Okay.
So when you think about all of the different things, like just your imagination can run, oh wow, so there's a well in Waterdeep that leads straight down, but you can explore all of this, and sometimes generations of Waterdeepians or whatever you would call them are completely oblivious to the fact that there's history right underneath them. Much like a lot of us are completely oblivious to the fact that there's probably, history upon history, just stories upon stories of civilizations that have lived underneath, the current grounds that we live on. So the idea of that is kind of very prevalent throughout the entire Forgotten Realms. So you have Underdark, which is basically an entire chasm of, an entire world underneath the world of Faerun. And that is, considered where the Drow live, but there's also mind flayers down there. There's, tons of other stuff. The Duergar, which are the kind of the dark dwarves, all live underneath. So you have all of these different layers of the Forgotten Realms, which makes it completely fascinating. I wanted to read a little bit of an intro to kind of give a glimpse. This is from the D&D Next adventure, which was right before 5e. This was kind of one of their adventures that they had after 4th edition D&D to kind of phase everyone into the next iteration of D&D, which was 5th edition. This is a D&D Next adventure called Murder in Baldur's Gate. This is kind of given a kind of a synopsis of the city and what we're looking forward to here. Cradled in a crook of the Chianthar, and often swaddled in mist, Baldur's Gate clings tight to the granite bluffs that channel the river. Trade nurse, the city grew from pirate's port to farmer's port to the bustling urban center it is today. Generations have worn smooth the cobbles of its narrow streets, and tens of thousands have lived their entire lives in the long shadows of its walls. The city's stone has soaked in the blood of acclaimed heroes and terrible villains. Alongside and atop such stains, nobles and commoners, rich and poor, have lazed in sweat, ruled and bled as they've played out the stories of their lives, making Baldur's Gate a place of history and a home to legends.
Is Baldur's Gate one, that's sick. two, is Baldur's Gate one of or the biggest city in Faerun? Or in that?
It is one of the biggest. I don't
Okay.
know. Obviously, there's no. There might be. I don't actually own. Ed Greenwood came out with a Forgotten Realms. Well, first of all, Ed Greenwood is the creator of all of this, so
Okay.
he is the Tolkien of the Forgotten Realms.
What
as
a
it were.
legend.
Yeah. So he. But I don't know if there's an actual,
Like a comparison or something.
yeah. But I would say, just from what I think I might know, which is obviously, I don't know if it's complete BS, but Waterdeep would probably be more populated, as well as
Okay.
Neverwinter. I would think Baldur's Gate kind of falls probably in that middle tier of cities. Let's just say, I'm going to say it's like Chicago.
Okay.
And
Which is a huge
Waterdeep
city.
might be, yeah, it's still a big city.
Waterdeep,
So-
New York.
Don't take that for any, if you're listening and you can say, no, it's actually,
Well,
Then
actually, let me
correct
push
me.
up my glasses. Well, so
correct me
Neverwinter.
because I'm not totally sure.
Neverwinter is the main setting of Honor Among Thieves, and that was a pretty
Yes.
huge city. Honestly,
Big city,
they don't
yeah.
spend. I guess it's not the main setting, but it's the major plot points of the film take place in Neverwinter, and so, I mean, it's a huge city. It is a center of trade and center of all sorts of stuff, right? That's what you literally just said. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So how does this, all this is great. There's a ton of history. And that's something, that I'm excited to learn more about. And maybe there'll be like books within Baldur's Gate 3 that have some history, because there was some of that in, I think, right? In Divinity Original Sin 2. Maybe I made that up. But there's like, you learn about the history of like little books you can
lore.
read and like lore
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Like there's that one guy in the arcs section of that game that wanted to meet a troll, and he had, depending on what happens, let's just say you come across a book on a guide to trolls, which, no joke, did help me actually defeat one in combat later on. But anyway, that was a fully written in game. I'm not like 200 pages, but just there's lore there. There's information there about the world and stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that in BG3. But my question is, how does all this relate to BG3? What is the story to lead into BG3?
From what I can gather, first off, I know that, I don't know if it's a pure fact, but I believe that Baldur's Gate 3 will not necessarily be a successor to either Baldur's Gate 1 or 2. So if you're listening and you're like, why should I pick up Baldur's Gate 3? I haven't played the first two. Well, you don't really necessarily need to.
Okay, well, that's
It
good to
might
know.
be good. Yeah, it might be good for, it'll certainly enhance your play a little bit, but it honestly, it's been 23 years since Baldur's Gate 2, and I've watched a recent synopsis of the playthrough, and honestly, I couldn't remember.
Well,
It's been so long, it's really, so it would have been really hard for them to obviously come and say, well, you remember the events of Baldur's Gate 2? No, because it's been 23 years. I don't remember. I don't remember any of that. So it's going to be a completely different story.
Okay, well, that's
So
good.
the story synopsis, from what we know.
Okay, of BG3.
Like Coniff, I have not played a ton. I've played a little bit, a smidget with our buddy Tempest. I played probably the most I'd played through with him. And it wasn't really much of anything. We were still on the beach, I think, after he killed me twice.
No surprise there.
Yeah, no surprise. So the story synopsis: in the year 1492 DR, after 120 years after the events of Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Om, and months after the events of Baldur's Gate descend into Avernus, the forces of darkness are on the rise. The player character, named Bayou, has been taken captive by the Mind Flayers who have launched an invasion of Faerun. And if you don't know what a Mind Flayer is, think Cthulhu.
Yeah. Yeah, very Cthulhu-esque.
Yeah, a humanoid Cthulhu
thing.
octopus face looking humanoid is basically a Mind Flayer.
Did you ever watch
powers and...
You ever watch Doctor Who?
No, honestly.
Okay, well, there's a creature, I think they're called the Silence in Doctor Who, and they don't look the same at all. But I think from what I've learned about Mind Flayers, the Silence and Mind Flayers are kind of similar in vibe.
The same.
So since you don't know anything about Doctor Who, that's where I will end this comparison. But for the listener out there that does, maybe I'm way wrong, but from what I remember about the Silence and what I've learned about Mind Flayers, it definitely seemed to be a similar style of
creature,
villain, whatever. Yeah.
Right. They have implanted the protagonist, as well as a host of other creatures, with ithilid tadpoles, parasites capable of enthralling and transforming them into other Mind Flayers. So basically, they're putting tadpoles through people's eye sockets and making them eventually turn into Mind Flayers, is what's going on here. They're basically making thralls, and then that's how they reproduce. Very, very lovely.
Just significantly worse than the scene from The Matrix with the little worm and Keanu Reeves' belly button. So
yeah, slightly worse.
Slightly.
Because there's eye stuff.
It's about eyes. Yeah, a little weird.
Yeah, most people are like,
yeah.
Belly buttons, probably not so much. But. All right. However, before the Mind Flayers can transform their victims, the Nautiloid flying ship, which is, kind of a spell jammer-esque vessel, and how they're getting around through the air, upon which they are all aboard, comes under attack from Githyanki warriors and their red dragons, and flees through multiple realms, including Avernus, the first of the 9 hells. The protagonist is freed during the fighting and steers the damaged ship back to Faerun, where it crashes. As the protagonist searches for a way to remove the parasites, they encounter other survivors of the wreck: the human wizard Gale, the half-elf cleric Shadowheart, the high-elf vampire rogue Asterion, and the human warlock Will, and the Githyanki fighter Lae'zel. That's all from PC Gamer 2020. So this is a while ago, but that is honestly the good summation of the current story. It hasn't really changed, so pretty spot on. So that is the story synopsis, and this podcast will not contain spoilers until we deem it necessary, which will probably be a while. So you don't have to worry about that. But that'll kind of give you an idea of where this story is headed. So
cool. I wanted to say that right away, like, having no connection to D&D, it's a very interesting setup, because it's, well, this would I can't say this either because it would give spoilers to Cyberpunk, and because Cyberpunk is getting a new expansion soon, there might be some people who've never played it, so I'll tiptoe around this, but the setup gives me similar vibes to a big plot point in Cyberpunk. And for me, that was one of my favorite parts of Cyberpunk, and how they did it in that game was very tragic. In this game, and I've seen the cutscene that this synopsis is basically describing, it's not as, it's right away, certainly at the very beginning, and so it's not as like, it's not really built up to like it is in Cyberpunk, but just this idea that you're on this clock, right? Like, you are infested by this little tadpole. Like, if you do nothing, you will become a mind flayer at some point. Like that, it gives you a sense of urgency. And I do wonder how the game's going to handle that. Like if I'm sure, like, I'm not going to try to like maybe get my hopes up that it's going to, if you don't do things by a certain time or date in game, you start to get more mind flayer-y than you were before. Just because like that's not very player friendly, like allowing you to do whatever you want whenever you want. But still, if you can sort of I don't remember the term, but like if you can kind of get into that role play and make decisions, based on this idea that, man, I've got this little squirming thing somewhere in my brain that I really need to take care of.
Yeah,
that's
well, I think
I
that
like it.
they have released, and I put a link I'll post it to our Discord, but the illithid skill tree that they've recently issued out, or someone has posted out there, that is fairly spoilers, so I don't want to go too into it, but to me it seems like if you activate or you let the tadpole in your brain that that this is kind of the prelude to Baldur's Gate 3. This is all, everything that I read is basically a cutscene before you even start the game. So this isn't a grand overture of the plot, but this is kind of give you a glimpse of what is to become. But from what I gather, maybe it's not time related, but if the decisions that you make, if you let that tadpole creep a little farther, maybe that's how they kind of dictate whether or not you become a mind flayer early or later or what. But it's just an idea that I have that little skill tree might have some sort of play into how all this kind of plays out. But so I want to cover real quickly on kind of the universe as a whole. So the Forgotten Realms is kind of I don't know if you'd call it.
It's like a continent, right? Or is it more
I guess
than
it
that?
would be a Well, Faerun is kind of the start. So the main stories of the Forgotten Realms are based in Faerun. So you have the Driss novels, you have, should be all of Baldur's Gate, but there's, who knows what could happen, between Act 1 and Act 4. But then the Forgotten Realms, I don't know exactly, I think it just has a more broad, almost like Asia. So Faerun might be kind of I guess it would be like a continent, and then Forgotten Realms. I don't know if it's another word for the world, but anyway, Toril is the actual world.
Okay.
And so I don't know if the Forgotten Realms just might be an area, maybe like the West, like North and South America. I don't really know, but
is this a flat Earth world or is it a round world?
I'm pretty sure it's like a world.
That's for you, swine. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. There's the tinfoil is out. So and on top of that are the planes of existence. So the cosmos of this world is organized into different hierarchies or clusters of planes known as cosmologies. In the Great Wheel cosmology, there are three primary categories: the material plane, where mortal life exists; the inner planes, the elemental realms; and the outer planes, the domains of deities. So you have it's very complicated, and I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because it will kind of get your mind going a little bit. But you have these gods that are not necessarily set in stone. So you have the main god. Oh gosh, let's see. Let's pull this out. I'm trying to come up with his name here.
You don't just have this committed to your daily life, Sean.
No, I really don't. You know, you have the elemental planes. So you have the plane of fire, the plane of earth, the plane of water, the plane of air. And then you have the Shadowfell, and the Shadowfell, I think you see a glimpse of it in the opening trailer for Baldur's Gate 3. Not necessarily the opening cutscene. Let's put that in there.
That synopsis is based on, right?
Yeah.
When the Nautiloid ship is
when he pulls
chased.
and the Red Dragon and the Githyanki are fighting. You know, it's obvious that that's not anywhere close to where it was originally.
Yeah.
Which looked like it looked like which is a kind of a more Middle Eastern looking city.
Okay.
And so when they're transported, it's definitely not that. It's winter and it's very shadowy and doesn't look anything like that. Let's see. But yeah, then you have these gods in different areas, and there's an entire array of different gods that you can people worship, and we'll get into a lot of the history, so I don't want to cover this in particular.
Right,
kind of just brushing over it right now, but because I'll break down a lot of the different gods and what this all means, and as far as bigger picture stuff leading up to the events of Baldur's Gate 3, it'll be important to kind of know. But yeah, so it's got a lot of different layers, so you can really go deep into all of that, and it's very complicated, but at the same time it makes sense. So we'll get into it a little bit later in the next episode. What I did want to cover, as we kind of fade out, I suppose, I wanted to introduce a little segment, at least for this little section of Baldur's Gate 3 that we'll be covering. And who knows, this segment could go on throughout the year, but I guess it just depends on what games we're playing. But I wanted to introduce the Forgotten Realms novel of this episode. And this is going to be a novel that I don't think a lot of people are like, oh, it's going to be a Drizzt novel. Well, it could have been. But
those are very popular. I do know that. And in fact,
popular. There's like 30 something of them.
I own the
40.
Hunter's Blade trilogy, I think, which has the 1,000 orcs and a few other. I have a few of those books, and I actually read one once upon a time. Didn't really connect that was like the same D&D that people D&D in, you know. So anyway, continue.
So after talking with our buddy Jeff, and he had mentioned this novel is one of his favorite novels, and it's one of mine. But I wanted to introduce the Forgotten Realms novel of this episode will be Brimstone Angels by Aaron M. Evans. So I picked this book up on a whim. I had read the Erebus Kale trilogy by Paul S. Kemp. Was really hooked on that, and I had seen Aaron M. Evans' book, The Godcatcher, and read that. Really liked that, and I decided to pick up her series of books. So this could be a little summation of what this book is about. So rejected at birth and raised in a village of tiefling misfits, Farida expects a life without friends, love, or control over her destiny. Then she makes a pact with a devil named Lorcan, and everything changes. Lorcan promises all she could ever dreamed of, and asks for nothing in return. Her twin sister Havilar urges Farida to resist the devil's sway, but Farida's not so sure. Lorcan may be dangerous, but the power he offers is exhilarating. In the ruins of Neverwinter, Farida doubts gets tangled up in a devilish snare 6 layers deep. A succubus playing human pawns against an otherworldly foe sees the twins as obstacles in her path. And Lorcan's monstrous sisters have their eyes on the city and on Farida. There's no time to question her pact with Lorcan. It will take every ounce of Farida's newfound powers to get out of Neverwinter alive.
Dun, dun,
This is
dun.
book 1. Dun, dun, dun. This is book 1 of a 6-part series, and I think I haven't read the last book, but I can strongly recommend this. It's a wonderfully unique cast of well-written characters, witty dialogue, and plot twists to leave the reader feeling they actually know these characters in the world they live in. So it's just a very, very well written. It's not worded in a very haughty manner at all. The two twins, Ferda and Havilar, are teenage girls, albeit tieflings. So their dialogue between each other is hilarious. Their foster father is a dragonborn named Mehen, who is just an interesting cast of characters. So you have to pick this up because it's very, very good. So
I am going to put it on my Goodreads right now. Although I think I already did put it on there.
It's a very easy read too, and it just kind of goes and goes and goes. It's really, really easy. So yeah, that's the first Forgotten Realms novel of the episode. So hopefully, if you are listening to this, you can pick this up, read it, and then pick up the next book within a week. And then I'll announce the next book in the next segment. So it'll be a fun little book club. Although, you know, if you can't read a book a week, then don't feel like you need to. But these are just recommendations. If you're playing Baldur's Gate 3 and are fairly new to D&D altogether, this is, I think, a pretty good starting point. And it's a fairly recent series of books too, so it will definitely have a little bit of a tie-in to the world. So the history of the book will not predate the current situation of the game. So,
well, how is that? I guess that'd be my final question for this before we wrap up this episode. But is there like a specific timeline this game that we know like when this is taking place? Is there stuff that's set way in the future, or is the nature of D&D that like it all kind of happened? Like there's not like a canon like there is in Star Wars necessarily.
No, there is. I don't think they ever retcon stuff, but they will. So as the editions go on, that kind of dictates on, I guess, and I'm sure Ed Greenwood has a lot to do with it too. Like he dictates what goes on in his world, and kind of gives guidelines on, you know, the D&D people to kind of how the history will work. So the game is set in 1492, which is 120 years after the events of Baldur's Gate 2.
That's right.
Which was released 23 years ago. So there's, you know, have changed a lot between Baldur's Gate 2. There have been, I'm going to guess, 2 editions of D&D since then, 4th edition and 5th edition for sure. I don't think 3.5, I'm pretty sure 3.5 is out there because I think that 3.5 is what Baldur's Gate 2 is based off of. So,
okay.
So a lot has changed, even between Baldur's Gate 2 and the current Baldur's Gate 3. So, you know, we'll talk about that in the next episode, but they're wanted to cover I'll cover the history of Faerun, at least some of the bigger events that will lead up to the story of Baldur's Gate 3. So
cool. Well, that does it for our first deep dive into what is Baldur's Gate 3 and D&D. That was fun. I learned a lot. I'm still awake. So no. Well, it's again, when I talked about this with you that late night, where like when you really look at a map of Faerun, and more importantly, when you consider like the nature of D&D is that like us or whomever could come up with a campaign, and that's what all these modules are, right? Like when people refer to module, they're referring to like a campaign story.
Yeah, well, a module used to be, I think they've changed formats now. They're hard smaller hardcover books or PDFs as times changed. But they used to be a not a hardcover thing. It was basically it was a file folder with some rule books or some guidelines for the DM, maybe a map if you were lucky, maybe some character sheets, but most of it was kind of a prefabricated adventure that a DM could run and have the players interact with, and you basically run a D&D campaign through pre-published novel, or not novels, but pre-published materials. So, and then third-party people started taking to that as well. So you have third-party modules that were being released, and I don't know what the legality is now with Wizards, but who knows? So.
Yeah. Well, my point is, like, you look at this map and you can just pick a point on this map.
And just your imagination just goes.
Yeah, and that's I think is the biggest. It's the biggest barrier to entry from someone who is very much a, like, needs that, like, I guess, order of, like, this happened, then this happened. But I've always, I've looked at, like, when we've played ESO, or even, Guild Wars, or even World of Warcraft, although I think most of WoW's map is a playable, like, that's the thing, like, it's playable. But you look at ESO's map, and you see all these not continents, but, like, peninsulas or islands or sections of the map that you can't actually play. And your mind just kind of goes wild with, like, the concepts of, like, man, wonder what's happening over there. So, like, we're talking about Baldur's Gate 3, and, we've mentioned Neverwinter and Waterdeep, and that all takes place along the Sword Coast.
Correct. Yeah.
And so, and I'm looking right now at the map, and which you can find, you just Google, listener, Faerun map. There's a WotC, Wizards of the Coast, link that'll let you download, like, a high quality version. But you've got all the way to, and I know that it stretches out even further because there's, like, a whole, what is this sea? The Sea of Fallen Stars is, like, there's land to the east of that as well. But, like, you look up, like, Thar, Zentil Keep, Border Forest, the Rye. I'm just, spitballing stuff that I see on this map. It's like, man, like, you could have an entire story's worth of content in the frozen forest, which is just north of the Turnback Mountains. And,
and there are modules and
that have, I'm sure.
I know Zentil Keep is one that they've done. So they're, and depending on what kind of flavor you want to interject or how your campaign is rolling, you can just pick and choose where they want to go, or player characters can decide, well, we're going to take a ship over to there, and then the DM has to react. They're like, okay, I guess we're going there, aren't we? So it's a cool way to do stuff, I think, if you just kind of let. And the funny thing is that all three of the Baldur's Gate games have been up and down that Sword Coast, so it'll be interesting to see. Maybe DLC will come out for Baldur's Gate 3, and we'll get to maybe go farther east, and maybe not close to Thay, where the Red Wizards are, that you definitely see in Honor Among Thieves. But yeah, it'd be really, really interesting to see what DLC comes out for this game as well.
Well, it's exciting, one, but. I mean, the journey is just beginning for us in this podcast, but two, our journeys into Baldur's Gate 3. I think next episode, we'll just give a little tease, and we'll do this every episode just to, so you know what you're in for next time. And maybe they'll keep you around, or who knows. But we know we're going to talk, as we mentioned, the video game face-off. We're going to do that first segment. But we're also going to deep dive into more of this. And because next episode is the last episode before the game officially releases, we are going to go in depth what we're going to play, I guess what type of characters we plan on creating. And Shiloh will have more like lore and history for us as well next episode, but a big chunk of that is going to be dedicated to talking about what are we making? What are we going to do when that game launches and we start up one of our mini campaigns with friends or solo or whatever. So next episode, we're going to find out exactly what type of hot elf or hot tiefling sorcerer Shiloh is going to play. So
there's no
there you
telling.
go. Wild magic sorcerer for you. So, but thank you so much for being here with us for our inaugural episode of Questing the Multiverse. It does feel great to get this off the ground and start running with it and really see where it takes us. And you like we mentioned, this is gonna grow. This is gonna adapt over time. We wanted to create this thing to be a little more open-ended. So if you have any comments or questions or shout outs or whatever, you can join our Discord and chat with us there, or send us those comments and concerns or questions that way, but also in the email, and that information will be in the outro that you'll hear in just a few. But Shiloh, any parting thoughts that you have?
No, I just
All right, cut. No, I'm just kidding.
just ready to go for next episode, and then we've got the launch day. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talking classes, a little bit of history, a little bit more lore for everybody, and hey, hit that first episode of the video game face-off. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening to Questing the Multiverse, and
yeah,
we will talk to you next week.
Yep. Also, Shiloh, I just want you to know that if you do play a sexy tiefling chick, I will try to romance you. So,
all right. Well, decision's been made, everybody.
all right. Talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone. Questing the Multiverse is brought to you in part by Coniff Productions, Howes Wood Designs, and Joel Crawford. To follow along with our adventures, please follow us on Twitter at QTM Podcast and consider joining our Discord, the link of which can be found in the show notes or in our Twitter bio. Want your questions or comments read on the show? Email us at questingthemultiverse@gmail.com. Finally, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a review or a follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening.